we also have this somewhat guiding phrase that came from a customer of ours who said, we need you to be state-of-the-art, not bleeding edge. Another customer said, there's a lot of bleeding on the bleeding edge. And many web teams don't want to be covered in Band-Aids. Some teams are willing to accept some number of Band-Aids in order to get the best possible user experience. A lot of teams are not willing to accept many or any Band-Aids.
Hey, this is Brian, and you're listening to JAMstack Radio, a bi-weekly series where we discuss modern web development with maintainers, founders, and developers. JAMstack Radio is brought to you by Heavybit, the leading investor in developer-first startups. For more information, visit heavybit.com. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, find us on Twitter at JAMstack Radio. What's up, y'all? It's B-Dougie here, and I'm really excited about JAMstack returning in person this November. I'll be there at this event, which is going to be the biggest party of the year. So join me by getting your ticket at jamstackconf.com and get an exclusive 20% off with the code RADIO. That's 20% off of your JAMstack Conf ticket with the promo code RADIO. That's awesome. See you there. Welcome to another installment of JAMstack Radio. On the line, we've got Josh and Steve from Pantheon. Hey, Josh, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Brian. Thanks for having us.
Cool. And you want to give yourself a quick intro and then Steve?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Josh. I'm a co-founder of Pantheon, a platform for extraordinary websites. Pantheon got started about 10 years ago. And my background before that was as a professional web developer, built up a small boutique agency in San Francisco. And we were working in the open source ecosystem around Drupal, working on gradually bigger and bigger, more complex projects. And we were really learning how to apply DevOps to those projects so that we could do things like work with large development teams, leverage version control, continuous integration, continuous deployment, and then deployment in a way that's ready to scale. And, kind of like the fifth or sixth time through that, we'd done very different websites for very different clients, but the DevOps part was just getting more and more honed. And we kind of realized that we could turn that into a product.
Oh, nice.
And we had bumped into a guy named James Lindenbaum in San Francisco, and he took us out to dinner a couple times and then basically said, you guys are really nice and I like going to Delphina, but I'm never going out to dinner with you again if you don't start this company. And so my co-founders and I decided to make the leap, and we launched Pantheon to productize that experience starting in 2010. Took us a couple years to get on the market, but it's been onward and upward from there.
Excellent. Steve, what do you do at Pantheon?
Yeah, Steve Persch here, Director of Technical Marketing. This week, I'm passing my 7-year anniversary with the company. It's flown by. But yeah, mentally time traveling back to 2010. I was at that DrupalCon in San Francisco where an early version of Pantheon kind of soft launched. And it really appealed to me because I saw the need for that. Around that time, I tried out Jenkins, and I think that DrupalCon was the one where I heard the term DevOps for the first time, and I was just kind of baffled by it. I was like, well, yeah, of course we need servers and there's this stuff to do. I eventually realized that's like a whole other job and that I didn't want to do it. So I quickly became a satisfied Pantheon customer, putting a major project on it. I was a Drupal site architect at the time and was very happy to have someone else worried about Nginx configuration and MySQL tuning, and I could focus on building the features that my customers were requesting, and the billable hours had to be tracked against. So it's been a whirlwind 7 years now at Pantheon.
Amazing, yeah. So 2010, that's before I knew how to write code properly. So I wasn't actually deploying anything outside of maybe WordPress.com. Honestly, I didn't even knew JavaScript at that point either. But anyway, I don't have to be nostalgic about this, but that's pretty early in my understanding of DevOps. So at that time, and I know about Jenkins as well. So Pantheon, can we talk more about the offering and what Pantheon provides to the folks who want to do DevOps or want to basically abstract that away from not doing it?
Yeah, totally. So it's interesting because we were on the not on the forefront of DevOps. Like it was already fairly well established as a practice in like general software development. But I think we were early in the wave of applying a lot of that to the web, which is why we kind of call ourselves now a WebOps platform, because it's kind of more targeted at this use case of people who are working with the web, people who are building websites. There's a couple things that are wonky about that because you're not just thinking about shipping code for your app. You also have to worry about content. That complicates some of the workflows a little bit. You have to think about that and be intentional. And we also think about it as being a little bit more inclusive of some of these other personas that come in and are really crucial in when you're doing the web or websites. So like you're not just thinking about developers and operators. You're also maybe thinking about designers and content creators and the people who are trying to get business value from the web. Like that's in the whole DevOps culture, is like bring this cross-functional team together, focus on winning together. And we just try to do that in the context of the web. And what that means practically is, we get everyone up and running on version control, which we run a lot of WordPress sites, right, still now, and a lot of those people are still climbing up that ladder, right? It's a big jump for them to get onto version control for all their projects, and then we help them run a nice continuous deployment, continuous integration workflow. We help them manage lots of individual site instances if they need to scale out. You've got not one website, but a company with 10 or 50 or 100 or 1,000 websites, or an agency, right? Like Steve used to work at and I used to work at, where we have 50 clients. So we help people with kind of like the operations at scale. And now, as we'll talk about, we're getting into some exciting new stuff that's particularly relevant to the world of JAMstack.
Cool. Okay, well, I'll bite. What's the new stuff?
So the new stuff we're calling front-end sites. So for Pantheon's whole history, we've run the LAMP stack style of doing websites. Pantheon started with Drupal, quickly added WordPress. They run on a nearly identical stack of technologies, and it's not a coincidence that Pantheon started about a decade after that stack started to emerge and solidify as a leader in the web development ecosystem. Drupal came out in 2001, WordPress in 2003. And it was pretty messy for the 2000s of like the different ways of doing Drupal and WordPress. The 2010s were pretty messy for all the ways that you can do the JAMstack, all the way you can do JavaScript-centric sites. So now, about a decade into that, 9 years after the release or the open sourcing of React, we're coming out with front-end sites as the way to do front-end frameworks on Pantheon. So under the hood, it's developers pushing their front-end framework code to GitHub. The Pantheon GitHub app sees that code push, build process runs, and then deploys either to the static storage or a Node.js container running behind our global CDN. That's provided us a ton of value for many years for those CMS sites.
Yeah, and the idea here is, there are already, great platforms out there for front end and kind of, front end first. Netlify, Vercel have a ton of respect for the products that they've built, and they're continuing to push the envelope on so many fronts. And we see our role as, trying to fill and provide an answer to the wider web of what's a really good way to do this when you want to use an open source CMS as your backend. And there's lots of cases where people want to do that because it's, they want open source for freedom, or, flexibility, or controlling their own roadmap on that side, or it's the right tool for the job. Like, headless WordPress is a neat thing to spin up quickly and throw in for a lot of solutions, and, gives your content editors a much better experience than giving them a GitHub repo. And also, kind of being able to bring our experience with really like large scale web use cases, because we've grown a lot. I think over the past 10 years, we've got, we already run hundreds of thousands of websites. We're reaching over 1 billion unique visitors a month. And we're very experienced with handling kind of high end enterprise requirements, high traffic sites, mission critical sites, and being able to speak to that part of the market and say, look, you want to build the best possible user experience. And that means, you need to use a modern front end framework. Then you need to think about where you're going to store your content, because the framework doesn't, the front end doesn't do that anymore because you've decoupled these two things. And a lot of people go down that path and then are deterred or at least made very uncomfortable by the complexity of having to wire too many different platforms together to get what they want. And our strong hypothesis, and we're finding out as this starts to get into market this fall, is that there's a real thirst for someone to simplify that a little bit more. Like we really made our bones in the past 10 years on being an opinionated platform for the right way to do these, traditional open source CMS powered sites. And we think we can provide a similar value in the brave new world of, modern front ends and decoupled architectures. And it's like not that our way is the only way. It's just that our way is a really like well paved path that's very guaranteed to work and be sustainable over time for people. Because I think that's what a lot of folks are looking for.
Yeah, and the sustainability is, I think, with your experience in the LAMstack, like that was a tried and true path for getting stuff up and running, and it was like this, again, you mentioned the opinionated way, but it's a strong opinions to get people shipping Web 2.0 sites. I'm curious, as the ecosystems evolved, because now there's a lot of these front end, like you now have a front end sites platform. The evolution of this stuff, I'm curious from your purview. Obviously, you're invested in front end sites, but we also have new runtimes. We have web components. We have all these new ecosystems. Is that something on the back of the mind or the roadmap for Pantheon?
It's something we're absolutely thinking about. One way I've thought about it the last few years is through the question, what computer assembles the website? That's something I've built into presentations the last few years, that in the early days of the web, like it's literally the brain of the webmaster is hand combining the templates or the markup and the content. CMS sites, the LAMstack made the web server or PHP web server be the computer that combines the templates and the content. With iPhones and single page applications, those iPhones became the most powerful computer in the whole stack. Like, let's make the iPhone be the place that assembles the website. That had a ton of downsides, performance implications. So like, let's move it back behind a CDN, have a build process do it, or maybe a Node.js runtime, or maybe a serverless runtime. So that answer is always changing. And what we're seeing, companies like Cloudflare and Fastly is one of our partners, are making the edge be an increasingly viable answer to that question, what computer assembles the website? We see where that is going. However, we also have this somewhat guiding phrase that came from a customer of ours who said, we need you to be state of the art, not bleeding edge.
Yeah.
And another customer put it like, said, there's a lot of bleeding on the bleeding edge.
Yeah.
And many web teams don't want to be covered in Band-Aids. Like, some teams are willing to accept some number of Band-Aids in order to get the best possible user experience. A lot of teams are not willing to accept many or any Band-Aids. And so as we watch more teams become successful with these newer runtimes like Deno or WebAssembly become viable answers to the question, what computer assembles the website, we need to make sure that there is a successful path before we encourage our slice of the market to go down that path.
Yeah.
Because the slice of the market that we have, well, one slice that we've been highly adopted in is higher education. And they're thinking on very long time scales.
Yeah.
Some of these universities are centuries old. And for them, like, getting onto WebAssembly in 2022 or 2023 or 2024 or 2025, like, is not that big of a deal for them. They need to make sure that they are staying within successful guardrails, and whichever academic year they make the jump to the next new thing is not that big of a deal for them on a decades-long time scale.
And I think with WebAssembly and like edge computing in general, everybody's still hunting around for like the killer app, because the types of work that are appropriate to do at that layer with that runtime are different than, like, certainly not the traditional CMS workloads, and even like assembly, like build step workloads at that level, you got to think about it really carefully. People are edging around features that are about tweaking the experience kind of at the last mile. We did some work on that earlier this year with this idea of edge-based personalization, which shows some promise, but like it's actually kind of complicated to get right. And there's lots of ins and outs with that stuff. And like the ability to do it at the edge is one thing, but do you have a strategy for how you're going to vary what for whom based on what information? And you really have to connect all those dots to make it a really killer feature. But we're definitely keen on that. And then you also mentioned like web components. And one of the things that we're also actively interested in, one of our principal engineers just did a talk on this at a conference around decoupled sites last month, is where do design systems fit into this equation? And, again, everybody's got like, yeah, you can kind of sort of see it in your head, the vision of designers get to use Figma, and that seamlessly goes into some other system that then lets you deploy updated UX packages out to your mobile app and your mobile web and your other web thing and your digital signage, and like all of that just works. And I know some people that have done really big consulting projects at like, companies like Nike and elsewhere where they did a ton of work to kind of make that dream come true. And it worked, and it's there. That dream is real. But again, it's like you need a Nike level investment of energy to get it up and running, and then even more to maintain it. So I think we're still in the early days of fitting all those pieces together. But it's certainly something we're actively interested in.
Yeah, for a while I was trying to coin the term zombie style guide. As I heard people throwing around the phrase like, we need a living style guide. We have a style guide where we decide on our styles, and that gets synced with the CMS or the front end framework. But in practice, many of the teams I saw had zombie style guides where like they figure out the design in a style guide, it gets ported over to the production system, and there's no living system actually connecting the two. And what you end up with is a slowly decaying design system. And yes, it can often take a Nike size level of effort to make it work. And that's the kind of problem space that we want to bring within reach to a broad majority or a plurality of web teams.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, and I love the approach of like your customers and the persona. So serving them first as opposed to delivering Band-Aids for everyone who wants to jump on the bleeding edge. I think it's pretty valuable. I have actually not done any edge computing myself for any projects because I am limited bandwidth. And I also, I prefer having established documentation out there as well. So as soon as everything's well documented, that's when I'll start using that stuff. But yeah, until that day, I'm happy just to use stuff that I know will deploy and work and make sure the green light is always good every time I merge from GitHub. Yeah,
absolutely. You want to stay in your power curve.
Yes,
and that's a good place to be.
Yeah, and I know there's like so many different tools out there, and it's interesting to see this sort of evolution where your product is going. So I'm curious, like with the JAMstack folks, do you see a lot of folks moving over from like the Drupals or going for WordPress API to putting a fancy Next app or Astra app on top?
Yes, one way I think about it is every year that goes by, what's going to happen to the percentage of front-end developers who expect to be working in PHP-based tooling and the percentage of developers that expect to be working in Node.js-based tooling? I don't know how fast it's switching, but I know it's switching.
Yeah.
So timing that right has been a challenge because this wave has been coming for a decade. And because some teams have gotten cut on the bleeding edge, they have stepped back. One of a leading agency in the Drupal space did their own website as the very first React to Drupal website, I think in 2015 or something. And a few years later, they brought it back to monolithic because they realized that in chopping off Drupal's head, they lost a lot of what they were taking for granted, and they lost a lot of the internal resources they had who understood fully monolithic systems. So that's the kind of story that's happened a lot over the past few years. Teams dipping their toes in the water, sometimes getting burned by it. But still, they know the promise is there, and if they can get the green light and not feel like they've wasted a day or a week exploring broken tools, then they'll be much more confident taking a full leap rather than dipping toes in the water.
Yeah, and I think that the thing that I see that's the shift that's happened maybe in the past couple of years is the first wave, at least from our perspective, and again, where we have our like corner of the ecosystem, right? So it's people who are already kind of up and running on these mature open source CMSes, not people who were just like born anew into the JAMstack world, and that's just where they started. What we saw was a first wave of people who were really chasing technical possibilities. It's like new frameworks, new ways of working, new capabilities, and it was a very developer-led rush to a new set of tools that showed that like there's absolutely a there, right? That's your classic innovator wave.
Yeah.
But to Steve's point, like some people like coming back with Band-Aids and saying like, yeah, but maybe not for me yet. And now what we're seeing is another wave, which is driven more by a clearer business case, if you will, because the truth is you can inarguably deliver a higher quality end user site visitor experience with this modern tooling, and web properties that have better user experiences and companies that provide better customer experiences, they get better results. They win. And the people who have poorer web experiences will eventually improve or they'll die. And so you're seeing a lot of folks saying, okay, this is important. We need to get to this because it's what our customers expect. And that level of that expectation around quality of experience is always going up. And then I think you're getting a lot more rational conversation of people thinking a little bit longer term, planning ahead and saying, well, what's the best way to go out about doing this? And therefore, and also because some people went ahead and blazed the trail, there's more known pitfalls and so forth. There's less surprises as it goes along. And I think, in our corner of the market where, the preponderance of the work of the teams that we serve is still in the monolithic realm, maybe they're seeing 10, 20% of their projects now starting with the idea of a decoupled front end. We're also starting to see, it's really interesting having conversations with people that are coming from the front end first world and realizing that open source as an answer on the back end is interesting if it were easy, right? Right now, like you can get that contentful thing up and running real quick, and that's really attractive because it gets you up and running. But then, is contentful the right partner for you long term? Is that the right solution for this project? For all the same reasons that your front end is really open source, so that you have full control over it and you can chart your own destiny. A lot of people are realizing the same degree of avoiding vendor lock-in and other things on the back end is also powerful, and so I think we're gonna see how that's something I'm very curious to see about. Like when we're able to show people a really well lit path from either direction to using this architecture and being open source on both sides, to see what kind of attraction that generates.
And I think there's growing philosophical alignment between the back-end ecosystem and the front-end ecosystem. WordPress has had in its documented philosophy for a number of years the idea of decisions, not options. Like WordPress as a community prefers to just implement the best practice rather than, Drupal in comparison will sometimes expose a million checkboxes and say, good luck picking the best configuration. WordPress is better at saying, no, these checkboxes are pre-checked or no checkboxes at all. And that appears to be a shift that's happening in the front-end ecosystem as well. A few years ago, you might have spun up the latest front-end framework and ended up with a huge node modules directory and a giant JSON file that you are now responsible for maintaining in perpetuity. For the more recent front-end frameworks that have come out, they seem to be taking inside the framework more responsibility for more decisions, because there's some fatigue, I think, out there among teams that don't want to be responsible for figuring out every single detail of a front-end framework. Those two things seem to be coming into sharp alignment, where there's just a preference for companies like Pantheon or open source frameworks, both on the back end, front end side, to make decisions that work for a broad majority of websites.
Cool, yeah. And I'm intrigued, and I'm sure the listeners are intrigued. So I'm sure someone's probably listening and they're working with like a Drupal or all these other CMSs that were tried and true. Like, what's the getting started path for Pantheon for folks who are listening?
Sure. The getting started path for us right now involves a feature flag. So you go to pantheon.io/decoupled CMS, fill out the form, tell us about what project you might be interested in doing. We add the feature flag to your organizational workspace, and then you can, in the dashboard, spin up. Right now we have Next.js plus Drupal, Next.js plus WordPress, and Gatsby plus WordPress baked into the dashboard, and we're expanding those sets of recipes. So we have preset opinions on both sides. There's the start state for the CMS that's pre-configured with things like the GraphQL plugin or the appropriate modules in Drupal turned on, caching turned on in appropriate ways. And then on the front-end framework side, our engineers are working on a suite of NPM packages that, again, preset the appropriate ways of reading that data out of the open source CMS.
And I think there's, the old schools is not something to be ashamed of. I use the term mature, which
that's better.
In a business context, it carries. There's some things where you want it to be mature. Honestly, like in your stack, thinking about where you're working with like real innovator tooling versus where you want to have really established tooling. Everybody's mix may be different, but it's very few people are like all innovation all the time, because that gets pretty wild.
Yeah, all these systems still are telling time by counting the number of seconds since 1970. So referencing a few decades back doesn't bother me.
Amazing. That is so true. Well, I appreciate y'all coming on the podcast, talking about Pantheon and your new ships and the new focus. So folks, definitely check it out. I did want to check out some picks. So these are jam picks, things that we're jamming on. Could be music, food, entertainment, tech related. Nothing's off limits. And if you don't mind, I'll go first. And then whoever wants to jump in next, feel free to jump in. I just had a guest on this podcast who's the author of Learning TypeScript. It's an O'Reilly book. Really enjoyed that conversation because I have been using JavaScript for a while and had been using TypeScript for a while too, but not really using TypeScript. I'm like one of those folks who like get to come into inherited code. There's already TypeScript in the project, and I just learn on the job, but never really took the time to learn. Okay, what is the reason for TypeScript? What are the tools? So I've been learning that pretty quickly as building a new TypeScript app from zero to production at this point. And this book was super helpful. I just read the book cover to cover, which I don't do a ton with O'Reilly books, but I just felt like I needed to have a good understanding of what the benefit and what the sort of features are in TypeScript that I should be aware of. And it was like a weird situation where TypeScript now in the 4.9, I think is the latest version. The latest version is actually pretty useful. I say that because it wasn't useful like 2 versions ago for me. And I had bad practices from my old TypeScript days to current. So highly recommend check out the podcast, but also pick up the book, Learning TypeScript as well. I don't know. Either of you, do you write JavaScript, TypeScript? Is that in your wheelhouse?
TypeScript is not in my wheelhouse yet. At Decoupled Days, I interviewed someone who had presented on Rescript, which I hadn't even heard of. Yeah. I thought, oh no, I need to keep track of more than one way of typing my front end code. But I see the appeal of TypeScript, but I have not gotten past Hello World myself with it.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I've only used it in limited context of some proof of concept code around edge compute, because if you can get it to TypeScript, then you can compile to WASM, and if you can get to WASM, then you can get it to the edge.
Yeah.
But I would say only 1.5 steps beyond Hello World. So maybe that's a good one for us to pick up and have on our shelf.
Yeah, it improves the language of JavaScript in so many different ways. And my historical background from TypeScript has always been library authoring. So having the sort of understanding in the VS Code, Merlin type autocomplete and stuff like that, TypeScript, that was kind of the sort of gimmick to get people to use TypeScript in a lot of projects. And I think it's gone so much further past that it's definitely worth checking out. And things like TRPC, which I'm going to do a talk at QCon next month on TRPC, where you can build APIs using types in TypeScript. And it's a beautiful way to sort of approach the problem. It is new, so obviously it is bleeding edge. So take that into consideration. But if you're into contributing back upstream, definitely the best time to get involved now.
Cool.
Yeah, and I had one more pick, which is a show I've been watching every night with the wife. We caught up on the first season like a couple weeks ago. Like literally, I think we kind of binged it. And now we're in the second season, which is Only Murders in the Building. I've been hearing folks talk a lot about this. I think if you like true crime and drama podcast, that is the premise, is that 3 tenants in a building. I will give away the plot. But anyway, they create a podcast while they're trying to discover what happened in the building, which is what it's called, Only Murders in the Building. And there's like a sort of like, what's the Serial podcast type host that's in there, played by Tina Fey, Steve Martin, and Martin Short. I did not realize how funny they are together, but I also did watch all those shows like the Three Amigos and stuff like that, or the movies rather. They do a great job, even for their age, which they're up there. I don't even know how old they are, but worth checking out.
Yeah, definitely 70s.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that show. I was late to season 1, so I think we binged season 1 and then we watched season 2 as it came out each week. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah. I'm surprised on how much I enjoyed it. So definitely, I highly recommend folks check it out. Steve, do you have picks?
I am soon to be jamming on Astro.
Nice.
I've been reading the docs for Astro on my phone during downtime, and I respect their opinionated stance, the way they lead with the statements like, we are preferencing content-heavy sites, and we have the view that these other frameworks have preferenced web application-like experiences. And while that's not a hard black and white divide between content-focused sites and web applications, Astro is leaning hard towards content-focused sites, and that's probably the bulk of the web sites on Pantheon. So that's one that I need to get myself into. Their focus on server-side rendering aligns well with what we're doing at Pantheon, and the way they seem to be relatively agnostic about which other front-end libraries you might layer on seems to be appealing to me.
Yeah, I'm a fan. I did have Ben Holmes come on to not talk about Astro, but Astro, he now works at Astro. And I did have an opportunity to build an Astro site, which is no longer an Astro site for reasons, the whole website and web application. It's the paradigm that I want to lean into more website stuff, but I was building it as a application. And that's how I learned Astro and what its use case was. So that site is hotopenSauce.pizza if anyone wants to check it out. Some of the features we added were very web application heavy, but I will be shipping a new Astro app soon. So stay tuned.
All right. Well, I'll have to check out hotopensauce.pizza.
Correct. So hot.opensauce.pizza.
Nice.
It's a discovery tool for finding trending open source projects. So there's a whole meme and a branding going on over there. But
yeah. I checked out your just opensauce.pizza before when I was like, just doing my due diligence, and like that's a really cool project. So now I have to see what like the hot open sauce is like.
Yeah, we're serving up another pizza site pretty soon too as well. So also stay tuned.
Sweet.
Yeah. So Josh, you have any picks for us?
Yeah, I've got a couple, and I'll do one tech and one non-tech. So the tech one is a project called the HTTP archive, not to be confused with like web.archive.org that like screenshots every website over history. Like that's cool too. But the HTTP archive is actually a really interesting project where they're running a crawler across like close to 10 million sites twice a month and pumping all the data into a publicly accessible Google BigQuery project. So, and it's like got down to like the complete web page test, all like hard data, all the details. So I'm plugging it because while we were getting, this is now going back like maybe a year and a half, when we were just starting to get the team together to really go all in on this front end sites project for Pantheon, I was using it to do all this research. Like, okay, how many websites are actually running this stuff? And like, there's cool tools out there like built with that'll give you like for a business user like a high level overview of things and a chart, which is nice. But like, if you want to answer a question like, well, how many people are using what version of Next.js, and also have this other thing, and what's their average time to first paint, right? That's data you can pull out of the HTTP archive, and the fact that they have it going back several years, it's just super awesome. So I guess over the past year and a half, I don't get to write as much code as I used to, but I have like the place where I've been able to stay close to the metal is messing around with data and like being able to get like a real true big data set in BigQuery and just like thrash around with it was like super fun. I really enjoyed that experience and have found it to be useful in a lot of ways. So that's my tech pick. And my non-tech pick is a book that I read this summer called Cloud Cuckoo Land that like sort of blew my mind. It's like a multi-layered story that some of it's happening in the future and some of it's happening in the past, and like, kind of pushes all the buttons from like what's it like to live in a world where it feels like the apocalypse is always just around the corner and technology is changing everything. And I don't know, I haven't read a book like that left me feeling like it actually gave me like goosebumps at a couple points. And so if you like sort of speculative fiction and can hang with like a longer book, it's like 700 pages. It's a real treat. So those are my picks.
Love it. Yeah, I dropped links in the show notes as well, and looking forward to. I don't know if I can commit to that book yet, but when I do have some downtime, it's definitely going on my Amazon wish list for sure.
Yeah, you're gonna want like to be able to, it'll prevent you from sleeping. Like you'll be just like, okay, one more chapter, and like you gotta time that right for your life.
Perfect. Well, speaking of time, we're out of time, and appreciate y'all coming through and talking about Pantheon. Folks, definitely check it out. Reach out and keep spreading the jam. And see you next time. That's all we have time for today. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, find us on Twitter @JAMstack Radio. This show is brought to you by Heavybit, the leading investor in developer-first startups. To learn more about Heavybit, visit heavybit.com.